Hello everyone, do you want a writing lesson? Come on, follow me, we'll learn it together. Because I've rarely seen in a chess game a knight dominate a bishop so much. So let's take a look at this game where the player with black is named Carissa Yip. She's an American player, and currently she's the best player in the United States. And facing her, Eileen Roberts with white. So we're going to follow this game. I've put the black side because the writing lesson will be from black's perspective. So white starts with e4. e5 is played, kf3 attacks the central pawn, kc6 defends, it's classic. King c3 and king f6, there we go, the four knights game. And now white plays h3. So this is quite a rare opening. Usually the move bishop b5 is played in this position, and as a result black plays bishop b4. And now look at what the player with white does. She plays bishop d3, she protects the pawn of e4, thinking that if there's an exchange of bishop for knight, then the d2 pawn can recapture, freeing the c1 bishop. Black plays d6, kingside castling, and here you might say, yes, but the player with black would never play bishop takes knight, allowing the d2 pawn to recapture and activating the bishop. Do you agree with me? Why would she do it? Well, she's going to do it. Bishop takes knight. That frees the dark square bishop and gives white the pair of bishops. And yet, the position is not so clear. It is even interesting for black. Look, I'll explain. White do have the pair of bishops, they have castled. Moreover, black are going to play a scheme here. So, white have a development advantage, they've castled the pair of bishops, and it's white's move. And yet, as I was saying, the position is not so clear. It's even very interesting for black. Why? The exchange on c3 caused a change in the color dynamics. White are the only ones with the bishop on the dark square. So for white to try to gain the advantage, they need to make the most of their bishop on the dark square. Because what does it mean to play with the pair of bishops? It means playing with the dark square bishop, the bishop that the opponent is missing. And that's why the player with black just played a scheme. She deprives the dark square bishop of that square on g5. And she has set up a very solid central pawn structure on dark square. And even though black don't have a dark square bishop, they still have one more piece to fight on the light squares, of course. Since the dark square's bishop, for its part, is unable to fight on the light squares. So, the strategy for the player with black here is to maintain this pawn structure that controls the dark squares, but sooner or later to play f5 to initiate conflict on the light squares. Not to push it to d5 because that would weaken the pawn on e5, but to push it to f5 after kingside castling, of course. And for white, it's trickier to do the same thing. If white tried to play f4 after moving the knight, the exchange could then weaken the pawn on e4, which would become an isolated pawn without protection. You see, this is the consequence of the fact that the pawn d2 is not on d3, that it has gone to c3, whereas black still have their pawn d6. So black have this pawn structure that holds the dark squares, a real central lock on the dark square, and the f7 pawn, which can play f5 to attack the white center, whereas white cannot do the same. And that's why you have to be careful in chess with the principles that are told to beginners, which basically say yes. If you are better developed, if you have castled, you have the advantage. Well, here, that's not the square. White do have the pair of bishops, they are better developed, they've castled, and it's even white's move. And yet the position is not worse for black. And we're going to see that in the game. Bishop e3 was played, knight to e7. The knight is actually heading towards the g6 square. Knight to d2 is played, kingside castling. Queen to e2, the rooks are connected. Bishop to e6. For now, both players are placing their pieces on the right squares, the rook on the file. Knight g6, the b3 push, queen d7. Take a good look at the bishop and the queen who are aiming together at the h3 pawn. You never know, there could perhaps be a sacrifice on h3 at some point, followed by the arrival of the knight. Well, that's not going to happen in this game, but you still need to keep an eye on it. White plays c4, the b6 push. Look at the pawn structure, how it has been built on the black squares. Only the f7 pawn is on a white square and will come to fight on the white squares. White too, they have a strong defense on their weak color, with all these pawns defending the white squares, but they're going to have a hard time playing f4 because of the weakening of the pawn 4. That's what I was telling you. And then the knight on g6 is there too, to double the control over the square f4. White play knight b1. They're going to reorient towards the square d5 by way of the square c3. And there, queen d8 is played. And when the American player played that shot, I was surprised. I thought to myself, what is she doing? Because in the game, I would certainly have played knight h7 to prepare for that push to f5. But the problem is that white has the move. Queen h5, you will see the difference between the two variations. Between the move I would have played and the plan of the American player, which is much more precise. Because this move, queen h5, comes to control the square f5 3 times. So it's true that you can play f4 with the knight to attack the queen. But if it's taken, the f4 pawn will be weak. For example, queen f3 to attack it. And will be forced to play g5 to defend it. And that weakens the king a bit. As for the white square bishop, it will be able to be freed by this e5 move to take advantage of the rook-queen alignment. Because if we take the pawn, e5, bishop takes h7 check, and we'll be in tears in that position, we lose the queen. So you understand in this position, if we play knight h7, queen h5 and f5, we're going to carry out this f5 push under bad circumstances. Now look at what the player with black does. She wants to play f5. But she won't put her knight on h7. She plays queen d8. kc3, she puts the knight on d7. First of all, there will no longer be the direct alignment between rook and queen. Well, there is still this alignment, but it will be less effective than in the variation I showed you earlier. And after queen h5, we'll insert the move f5, f4, and the knight will go to f4. That's the difference. When we now play the knight to f4, after bishop takes, pawn takes, well, the pawn, on f4 it can be defended by the queen on d8. If, for example, there's queen f3, it's not like in the other variation where we were forced to play g5. Here we can play queen g5 to defend, followed by knight e5, which will chase the queen, perhaps push her to f3 to attack g2. In addition, the bishop attacks h3, the opposite queen-king, and we end up with a beautiful attack. So, in the game, the player with white will not play queen f3. There will be knight d5. And here, we have this exchange, bishop for knight, then we recapture. And even queen g5 provokes the exchange of queens, offers the exchange of queens which is accepted. Queen takes g5, pawn takes g5, and white take control of the file. And we might think that, in this position, the bishop against the knight, the rook already on the file, it's good for white. Well, no, this is where we're going to get a lesson in horsemanship. What did the player with black understand? She realized that in reality, the light-squared bishop would not be able to play in the game. This chain of pawns being blocked on white square, it ultimately causes the obstruction of this bishop. You just have to play g6 and f5 so that the bishop has no square. Unlike the knight, which will be able to have black squares, and even more than that, as we'll see in the rest of the game. But for now, we have to challenge the rooks on the file. So rook to e8, rook takes, check, rook takes, the king comes to f1. Knight comes to c5, bishop to e2, the push to g6, and here, white play f3, which completely buries the bishop on the white square. But even if the bishop had gotten out, for example, to g4, we can play f5, bishop to f3, the bishop doesn't do much more. The rook is on the file, it can be exchanged for the other rook if it comes to e1. The knight is better placed than the bishop, and the king will also be able to infiltrate the position. But it's true that f3 is still really ugly, visually. So, king g7 is played, king f2, the push to f5, rook h1, rook to a7, bishop d1, the king improves, king f6, bishop a2, rook h7 is played, the rook comes to d1, the rook returns to e7, rook h1. For now, they're repeating moves, but not for long, because here she's going to play a superb move. So I'll let you pause the video to try to find it. It's not obvious at all. It's on black's side. What would you play if you had black in this position? So what did you think of? Here, it's not easy to know how to proceed, but she's going to proceed with g4. She sacrifices the pawn, and she's right to do so. It's a very strong push for black. Let's try to understand. White took, and we recapture. And here, white refrained from taking this pawn, from winning this pawn. Why? In reality, it's a trap. You shouldn't take it. Besides, in the game, white played rook h4. But if white take, then the square e4 is no longer defended by the pawn f3. So you can play knight e4, check, the king must move. King Vg3 attacks the rook and the bishop, so the rook must come to defend the bishop, and King G5. The bishop cannot move because of the rook, which is unprotected, so the king can come to F2, but now we can exchange everything. We can play rook takes, check rook takes, knight takes, king takes G4, and we are going to win this position with this 2 versus 1 majority. So you might say, yes, but white have a majority of 5 against 4 on the other side, but because of the doubled pawns on the c-file, white won't be able to realize a passed pawn easily. Look, for example, if white play c3, king to g3 attacking, so king f1, g5, white play b4, we don't touch anything. Because if we take, the pawn takes back, and then white have a majority of 2 pawns against 1 and will create a passed pawn, which will go to queen. After all, if white play b5, the position will be completely fixed on the queen side. And if white take, we recapture with the pawn and it will still be fixed. So we don't touch anything on the queen side and we keep developing. For example, g4. White plays c5, we still do not touch anything. We play f3, capture on b6, we recapture. If there's a capture, we can recapture. Now it's true that white can then play c4 to try to play c5 capture and free the pawn. The best here is to play king h2, I think. That's very strong. We're threatening pawn takes and to go to queen. And if there's a capture, we don't recapture. We play g3 and the queen is unstoppable. Black are going to get a promotion. So in this position, you understood that white couldn't capture. But since white don't capture, the pawn will advance to g3. Rook h4, g3, check. This ends up completely trapping the white square bishop and even now the king, who is a prisoner of the position. King e1, g5, we attack the rook. Rook h6, check. King g7, we attack the rook. Rook h1. We're going to come and exchange the rooks. We don't need the rooks on the board. Finally, the white rook. It's the most active piece. It has the file. So we're going to exchange the most active white piece. Rook takes, king takes, bishop d1 is played, so the king comes back. c3, the king arrives on f6, bishop c2. And now, knight d7. And it's still the writing lesson. The knight goes where? Well, it's heading towards square h4 to attack the pawn on g2. And it can make several maneuvers to get to h4, we'll see. Bishop d1 is played, knight e5, bishop e2 is played. So it's true that if white had played bishop c2, the knight, if it comes to g6, the bishop could take. But in that square, we have the superb sacrifice. Knight takes f3. And if it's captured, g2, and the pawn goes to queen. So in this position, white must keep protecting the pawn on f3 to prevent the knight from sacrificing itself. So he plays bishop e2, but that leaves the path for the knight. Knight g6, king e1, knight h4 attacks, king f1. The knight, you might think it already has a good position attacking the backward pawn on g2, but it's about to get even better. Knight to f5 to come to e3, king to g1, knight to e3. And now it's terrible because the king can no longer move between the squares h1 and g1. The pawn controls the dark squares, the knight the light squares. And the bishop on the light squares is still unable to play. So king to h1, king to e7, king to g1, king to d7. And now white are going to play bishop d3. And let's try to understand, because here bishop d3 is going to lose a pawn. The black knight can come to d1 and win the pawn on c3. But why do white play like this? Because if they keep repeating moves, apart from bishop d3, the only move for white is king g1. We can play c6 attacking the pawn twice. So it will have to be taken. King d1, we play d5 attacking twice, and soon king c5 to attack a third time, so the capture. Knight takes, attacking the pawn on c3 and c4. And now the knight comes back, still aiming to trap the king. The black king will be able to come in, attack the pawn on b3, without the bishop being able to defend, because the knight dominates. Once we win the pawn on b3, we win the pawn on a4, we move away, and the pawn goes to queen. So we now understand that white are facing this plan from black, which will consist of playing c6, then we take, then d5, with a winning progression. So white will try to find some counterplay, bishop d3, but knight d1, that loses the pawn. King f1, but at least that frees up the position of the white king. Knight takes on c3, king to e1, knight to a2, king to d2, king to e7, bishop to b1. And take a good look, the knight on a2. It's going to pull the same trick, coming to h4, then to e3. It's going to repeat the maneuver, knight to b4. Knight a6, knight b8, knight d7, knight e5, knight g6, knight h4, then knight f5, knight e3. He's going to repeat the same route as before, which was to put the knight on h4, then move it to e3. So knight b4 is played. The bishop on the white square has no targets. Everything is placed on the black square. So king c3, king f6, king d4, knight a6, bishop c2, knight c5. We put pressure on b3, bishop d1. Earlier I showed kb8 and kd7, but actually it was kc5, then kd7, but it comes down to the same thing. f2, ke5, re4. So here it's still the same, the bishop can't come to d3 to control the cage. g6 because there would be kf3 check, and after pawn takes, the pawn goes to queen. So re4, kg6. Bishop d3, kh4 attacking g2, so the bishop goes back to f1 and kf5. And it's terrible for white to play facing the threat of knight e3. If the bishop moves, we play knight e3, we attack g2, and the bishop can't even come back anymore. Defend, because we take. And if it's the king that moves back, we play knight e3 anyway. We attack the bishop, we attack the pawn. g2, you have to play king e2 to defend. But that leaves a path for the black king, who will come and eliminate all the pawns on the queen side. So what did you think of this riding lesson? Incredible, this game showing the domination of the knight over the bad bishop. So as you know, I'm following the Tata Steel tournament, which is ending soon, in just 2 days. Let's look at the tournament standings. Tata Steel Challenger, because you know, there's the Masters and the Challenger. So the Masters is for the strongest players. We've already looked at those games. And now we're looking at the Challenger. We can see that it's Andy Woodward in first place, the American, followed by Vasily Ivanchuk and Aydin Suleimani in third. And Kari Saip is in sixth place for now. If you haven't seen the other games from this beautiful Tata Steel tournament, with incredible positions, fun openings, amazing positions, we've had tactics and strategy, just like in this game, you can click the link above to access the full playlist. These are very short videos, 10 minutes, 15 minutes max, so you can watch them quickly, enjoy yourself, and improve your understanding of the game. We'll see each other soon for new videos, but leave me some likes. Comments too, I read all your comments. Share the video and support the channel as always. Alright, goodbye everyone.